with all that Predator has going for it, it's a damn shame that our collective cultural memory, colloquially known as the internet, has reduced it to a series of memes. The epic handshake. Goddamn sexual Tyrannosaurus. I ain't got time to bleed. Get to the chopper. If it bleeds, we can kill it. For the most part, they aren't even the memes I like, which is probably why I'm so annoyed. Anytime I tell anybody, anytime, or I see you, I have to consciously try not to do it in Bill Duke's voice. I don't even bother hiding my Sonny Landham impression whenever I tell people, we're all gonna die. Something that I've had way more cause to do these last 3 years than I'd actually like. And for a good long while, the Predator's imitation of Billy's laugh was my go-to evil laugh, until I mastered Mark Hamill's Joker laugh. My parents were very cool, so I saw this movie at some point in my early childhood. I think I would have been around 7 or 8. Can't really narrow it down any more precisely than that, because my childhood memories, apart from the movies I watched, have long since turned into memory soup. But it's safe to say this movie was a foundation stone of my personality, even though, or perhaps because, I saw it at a time when I was way too young to even begin to understand it. Not that there aren't plenty of grown-ass adults these days who miss the point so hard they might as well have been aiming in the other direction. These days, I see new things in it every time I watch it. So not only do I know that it's good, I know that it deserves the title of classic. Unlike most classics, Predator remains horrendously misunderstood. Oh look, says the typical review, here's an action movie that doesn't ask too much of its audience. And I, the typical author of a typical Predator review, know that that's an implied insult, but I'm banking on most action movie fans being too stupid to actually notice. It's a movie about manly men doing manly things with their manly man muscles. What more do you want? Well, I don't really need to want more, because Predator already has it. Predator is a movie about PTSD, Reagan Era US foreign policy, and how the military-industrial complex destroys even the relationships it claims to hold sacrosanct. The blood-brother bond between fellow soldiers who once shared a war together. It's a movie about karmic justice for the Vietnam War being delivered unto our protagonists from space. It's a slasher movie that casts Arnold Schwarzenegger, at the height of his fame and power, as the final girl. It's an action movie where the multi-million-dollar soldier protagonist only triumphs after he resorts to the most basic weapons in the human arsenal. Sharp sticks, big logs, ropes made out of vines, and pattern recognition skills. It's a blockbuster success that can pass for a cult classic now because no one cares about history. It is my second favorite action movie of 1987 after RoboCop, and even that was an open question until I figured out that RoboCop is actually a documentary. But I'm not J.R.R. Tolkien, so being a fictional allegory is no slight in my book. In fact, sometimes it even makes things better. For example, an army of graduate students could labor on a library's worth of theses for 1,000 years and still not even come close to deconstructing 20th century U.S. cishet masculinity half as well as this film does in 90 minutes. My gay friends sometimes ask, what the hell is wrong with the straights? And, quite frankly, you just need to look at this. I mean, it's all there. It's brutally well made, eye-gougingly beautiful on several occasions, and all anchored by an antagonist so fascinating that we're still talking about Predator movies nearly 40 years later. So let's talk about Predator, shall we? In 1985, Rocky IV came out, and a joke began circulating around Hollywood. Having faced off against 2 black guys and a Russian super soldier, the next logical step would be for Rocky to fight an alien, now wouldn't it? Screenwriters John and Jim Thomas took this joke serious enough for long enough to ask, wouldn't it make more sense if Rambo fought the alien? And then they answered their own rhetorical question with this script. A script good enough to attract the attention of one Arnold Schwarzenegger, fresh off Commando's success. This, in turn, attracted the attention of no less than 3 of the most powerful 20th Century Fox executive producers of the time. They hired, or let Arnold hire to hear him tell it, a director whose only credit at the time was a flop. But it was a flop that Arnold liked, and God bless him, because without him we wouldn't have Die Hard, or any of the movies made in Die Hard's wake. And the producers were smart enough not to get in his way. The better to pretend they'd believed in this project all along, after it became the 2nd highest grossing movie of its year. By all accounts, the shoot was terrible, like living in a gym rat frat house where everyone caught the shits. But none of that shows up on screen except when appropriate. And that's all the making of stuff I really want to get into. Read the wiki. I'm here to go deeper. Inception noise. I'm not going to do the Inception noise. Fuck that. Old joke. Sorry. Speaking of memes, there was a time when my milieu of movie lovers took the fact that Predator ruled, and the assumption that the general populace shared this knowledge, completely for granted. The opponents we used to shadow box against on the early internet, the mainstream movie critics of the 1980s, the ones who called Predator derivative, or tissue thin, or predictable, all died and lost their jobs. And we all fooled ourselves into thinking that we'd won something because of that. We forgot to evangelize. Even Roger Ebert, God bless him, only praised this movie as a commercial transaction, saying, quote, "It supplies what it claims to supply, an effective action movie," unquote. Because that was old Roger to the core, Mr. Too Damning with faint praise. Christ, I miss him. All of them miss the beating heart of Predator. A film with multiple beating hearts, like a Klingon. For one thing, this is the most innovative slasher movie of its day. By 1987, the slasher movie was just entering its postmodern phase, meaning it cracked the occasional joke about itself. See Friday the 13th, Part 6. Or it figured, why not pit our supervillain main characters against superpowered protagonists? See Nightmare on Elm Streets 3 through 5. But the subgenre had mostly given up any pretensions of formal innovation, and would continue to eschew them all the way up to 1995, or 6, or 7. Slap a bunch of teenagers down in an isolated location, and let fly. But in Predator, we have a slasher movie composed of action movie protagonists who would otherwise all be off on their own Commando-style adventures. In this, it is more technically innovative than New Nightmare and all of the Screams to date combined. I can't not love it just for that alone. It immediately paints a picture of how this new franchise, as we'd say today, could potentially go. After all, the post-Rambo military action movie is but one star in the vast modern action movie constellation. Any of them could easily be paired with the slasher movie format. As a post-Rambo action movie, it's naturally haunted by the ghost of the Vietnam War, and how the United States of America completely failed to deal with that war, its loss, and its losses. In the United States, in general, men are taught to be schizophrenic psychos, to prey upon each other, because we will be preyed upon in turn by a vicious, uncaring world of betrayal, tragedy, and disappointment. A green hell where everything is out to get us. Especially the booby traps and the people we once called friends. As such, we boys are taught that we must become the hardest of hard motherfuckers, capable of annihilating whole villages of people we don't even know on the flimsiest of pretenses, while always keeping a paranoid eye out for other, more successful predators. They're out there, you know, waiting. Not that it's all awful. We are allowed to express sincere feelings, even for each other, absent the rhetorical squid ink of contempt and casual homophobia that we deploy through most of our conversations. But only after one of us is dead. And that's mostly just so we don't embarrass ourselves. Because once that crack's allowed into the foundation, it'll all crumble. Faster than an earthwork dam in a torrential flood. All that's been repressed will return like a tsunami wave full of sunken ships. And you'll wind up scream-singing you and your boy's favorite Little Richard song into the jungle that killed him. Because goddammit, that was your song! Speaking of which, I think Alan Silvestri was really trying to go for the full John Williams on this score. It does so much of the work to set the tone and maintain the mood of the film that the rest of this picture could pass for a silent movie with minimal collateral damage. It's like how George Lucas used to talk about Star Wars before he wrote 3 of them in a row. The bombastic military brass is made purposely tense by the percussion's steady menace. All contrasted with dialogue that's often purely functional and sometimes too quiet by half. So you strain to listen to it, and then you get jump-scared by the fucking music. It's great, actually. Why don't more slasher movies do this? Oh, right, they do. They just do it poorly. Now I remember. Anyway, American masculinity, or I should say, United States masculinity, is as brittle as stale pasta, is my point. That's why the self-proclaimed manliest of manly men these days are really just the biggest, whiniest bitches. These days they'll crack from getting mean comments on their Instagram posts. At least these guys have to go through some shit before they crack. Max set up as easily one of the coldest motherfuckers in the group, casually threatening Dylan with death when they're not even 5 minutes into the jungle. Billy is the most quiet and reserved of them all, only moved to excess vocalizations by finding a tree full of skinned corpses. But the Predator's actions, or just its mere presence, makes the both of them lose their shit first and fastest. Billy's little suicide by Predator is the death of someone who would otherwise be the protagonist of the movie. After all, the final girl is usually the one who notices something is wrong first. Mac's death is similar. He gets to see the Predator first, and of course the death of Blaine makes it quote-unquote personal. But neither of them are the guy on the box. The guy who gets all the one-liners, and the most love from the camera, even all the way back in the character introduction shots. Only Mac gets some real time to himself. And even then, only after his obviously best friend is dead. You know, thought just occurred, between Arnold and Jesse Ventura and Bill Duke and Shane Black, this movie actually has as many future governors in its cast as it does directors. I don't know, it's just a nice thing I noticed. Just want to throw that out there. So Predator is a movie about how we, U.S.ian dudes, are taught to chop pieces of our own personality off as a self-preservation tactic. Or just let them atrophy until outside stimuli sends some sudden, shocking current through them, makes them twitch. Survival for what, you might ask? Why, continued existence, of course, in this best of all possible worlds, in this self-proclaimed greatest country on Earth. A man eats dog eats man planet, full of occasionally, literally invisible enemies. Multiple invisible enemies nowadays, when conspiracy theories are everywhere, and far more popular than any kind of objective truth, whatever the fuck that means. Sledgehammer a foundation long enough, of course it's going to collapse. The men of Dutch's little rescue team seem to have no lives outside of combat zones. And why would they? For one thing, those lives aren't too terribly important to this story. But I like to think it's also because PTSD isn't just about flashbacks, or getting overwhelmed by all the choices in the grocery store cereal aisle. For some, PTSD really sets its claws into them when they decide that, actually, the war zone is more of a home than whatever horrible home they fled from by joining up with the army in the first place. After all, the war zone's where all your friends are. And considering all the shit you've gone through together, your friends are probably much closer to you than whatever family you left in the first place. If nothing else, you can share drinks with them and try to make them laugh with your cringe-inducing dirty jokes. What, that doesn't sound good to you? Well, shit, what are you, some kind of a fucking communist? Of course, the deaths of all our main cast are supposed to be personal to the survivors. My men are not expendable, Dutch says to Dylan early on. And with that attitude, it's no wonder you're pushing 40 and still a major, my man. Never gonna make colonel until you get over that little cognitive hump. Probably why my granddad never made it past lieutenant colonel, now that I'm thinking about it. Then again, they're supposed to be soldiers of fortune. Mercenaries. And Dutch really does seem to like his job. If he doesn't suffer from the acute PTSD described above at the beginning of the film, he certainly does by the end. Dutch likes this shit because he's lying to himself about being in it for pro-social reasons. A rescue team, not assassins. As if that makes any difference to the people on the other end of his grenade launcher. As if warfare can ever be pro-social when it's waged on behalf of an empire. Gee, it's almost like that's the creation myth my country tells itself. Or something. The U.S. Empire's various late 20th century adventures up and down Central America are well and truly forgotten by now. Aided and abetted in part by pop culture artifacts like Predator, which criticize them only in as backhanded and obtuse a way as possible. People think Vietnam syndrome refers to an unwillingness to get into wars, but 5 minutes of reading about the last 100 years of Latin American history will easily put a lie to that. Back here, at home, on the ground, Vietnam syndrome really manifested itself in an unwillingness to give a shit about any war the U.S. might be involved in, either directly or by proxy. For about 20 years or so. You know how the cops treat John Rambo in First Blood? Those cops are Vietnam syndrome personified. Let's not even think about it. Sweep it under the rug. Get it outside of town. What country are Dutch and company illegally invading again? The real answer, both then and now, is who the fuck cares? The novelization says they're in Guatemala, and that makes more sense than any of the other options. Though I find the idea of Russian military advisors working with the landless peasants and indigenous Mayans of the guerrilla army of the people hilarious. Might as well call this country Guadaragua Nicodorma, for all the difference it really makes in the end. But in the beginning, we have a story about a rescue team tricked into becoming a CIA hit squad by the commander's former best friend. What happened to you, Dylan? Dutch asks. And really, what happened is Dylan got promoted. Dutch could trust him back when they were both grunts in the shit together. But then the world moved on, and Dylan got a job that required him to wear a tie, even in the fucking jungle. And Dutch got to go off and do whatever it is they did in Berlin. Like the good old days. Whatever that means. The Vietnam War ended, is what happened. And the U.S. military-industrial complex, and the complex of U.S. masculinity that it rests upon, refused to take that L gracefully, and spent the next 10 to 25 years taking out its frustrations on the countries of Central and South America, along with a lot of other places. The problem, as far as our military leaders thought about it, was that, it's not getting involved in other people's civil wars. Like, we can't not do that. That's not on the table. The problem was we got involved in a civil war on the other side of the Pacific, you see. As long as we stick to getting involved with people's civil wars on this side, then everything will be fine. Right? Idiots on the internet like to throw around the notion that you can't make movies like this anymore, when they usually mean you can't make movies full of slurs and casual sexism. As if Adam Sandler's entire corpus magically ceased to exist. You know, like, blink that out with the Infinity Gauntlet or something. Right? But when I say you can't make a movie like this anymore, I'm talking about a movie where the CIA is at least a secondary antagonist, if not the main catalyst for the entire fucking plot. These days we get CIA agent Bilbo Baggins restoring Black Panther to his throne. Or we just get Jason Bourne again. Fuck, they should have called that last one Born Again. TMCR. Me. You can't use that one. It's mine. If I catch you using that, I'm a lawyer up. Even the movies that revel in all the evil shit the CIA's been up to these last 20 years, like Zero Dark 30, go out of their way to show CIA agents feeling real bad about it. So, you know, it's okay. Dylan doesn't feel bad about shit. Or at least he represses feeling bad about it until the very end, when he's down no less than 2 men of his own, 6 Green Berets out of Fort Bragg, 2, or 2.5 really, of Dutch's men, and 1 arm. Dutch calls bullshit on Dylan's acceptance of their situation. It comes with the job. But Carl Weathers is such a good actor that I'm not even really sure he believes that. Is his going after Mac at the end an attempt at redemption, even if only too late? And if so, does Dutch throw him that extra gun in an attempt to help him? Or does he do it knowing, as he does by that point, what the Predator is really after, and is expecting Karma to do what he himself still cannot, even after Dylan's betrayal has landed them in so much unnecessary shit? I don't know. And that ambiguity is refreshing after years of watching corporate franchise crap where the line between good guy and bad guy might as well be as thick as a retaining wall, including other Predator films. Here, though, we have a pretty good illustration of at least half of Ronald Reagan's foreign policy after he declared his war on terror, i.e., a war on everyone within the U.S.'s sphere of influence at the time. After declaring said war on terror, the Reagan administration unleashed terror upon the world via the CIA, and it got away with this in large part by privatizing U.S. proxy wars, so that the American people, via Congress, would have even less control over them or knowledge of them. The most fictional thing in this movie is not the invisible alien, it's that the CIA cat's paw would need some kind of sob story about rescuing a cabinet minister to justify his participation in what would be a war crime if anybody did it to us, you know? A couple of helicopters full of guys land in Arizona or Montana and start trudging through the wilderness blowing shit up. What the hell do you think we'd do? He needs this sob story because Dutch is supposed to be a stand-in for the audience. And the naive assumption at the time was that the American people needed some kind of sob story to justify interventionist violence. Reagan's ideological heirs would carry this to its logical conclusion in the 21st century. But even back then, all you had to really do was say we're doing it to kill communists, and a good 50 to 70% of my fellow Americans would shrug and go, okay then. Worked in Vietnam. Didn't stop working just because Vietnam fucking blew up in our face. The lesson that the vast majority of sullen American conservatives learned from that war was that, well, we just didn't do Vietnam hard enough. Which is why it took us 20 years to realize we'd lost Afghanistan. When Oliver North took the fall for the Iran-Contra scandal, decades before the invention of the word selfie, the Capitol police officers charged with guarding the congressional chamber where he testified lined the fuck up to take selfies with him beforehand. By the way, Ronald Reagan's childhood nickname? given to him by his alcoholic father, either because he was a fat little kid or because of a haircut his mom gave him once, was Dutch. Found that little stray fact in my research. Just thought I'd pass that on. In Arnold, Reaganism found its residual self-image, manifested, naturally, in a beauty pageant winner from Austria, who actually believed all this supply-side economics Horatio Alger bullshit because, well, worked for him, what's your excuse? Is their attitude. Because that's not callous and indifferent and, the voice of anti-life or anything. And anyway, callous indifference to everyone around you is actually good, because it lets you make more money faster. Over-intellectualize it all you want. That's all you're going to find when you get down to the core. And really, Arnold was a far better idealized self than Reagan. And like Reaganism itself, Dutch only wins by dumb luck. His clever plays and seemingly well-thought-out traps defeated in seconds by an enemy whose methods and motives he can only really guess at. For me, the biggest laugh-out-loud moment in the movie comes not from Dutch's one-liners, or Hawkins' dirty jokes, or Billy's no-sell reactions to Hawkins' dirty jokes, but from the very end, from the final confrontation, when the Predator full-body backhands Dutch all the way across a pond with the air of a drunken animal abuser. The Predator keeps his pimp hand strong. And the real problem with the social Darwinism that undergirds conservative ideology is that there's always a bigger fish out there somewhere. There's always someone who's going to be keeping their pimp hand a little stronger. The internet seems to think that this film is a cult classic now because nobody knows what words mean. As if this isn't the first Arnold Schwarzenegger movie after Commando. Unless you count Raw Deal. But nobody counts Raw Deal because almost nobody saw it when it came out. And these days, people only talk about Raw Deal in order to make the same joke about it. Oh, Raw Deal. Isn't that what you call any deal with Dino De Laurentiis? I mean, ask Thomas Harris why Hannibal Rising exists. Or why the show even exists. As a post-Commando Schwarzenegger movie, though, we can see this as the final cementing of his reputation as the action star he'd been trying to be for, at that point, going on 15 years. If anything, I tend to see this as the pivot point, when he stopped trying to be just an action star and started trying to break into, God help us, actually acting. And for all the shit people give Arnold, he has some great fucking faces in this movie. There's a face you make when you ask your boy if he's found your other boy, and he says, "I can't tell." And Arnold pulls that face off admirably. Along with many others. Which is good, because Arnold has to carry the last 30 minutes of this movie, not just in his arms, but with his face. It's safe to say this script won the lottery when it won Arnold's interest. He's such a perfect foil for the Predator that there's a sizable chunk of Predator fans out there who will live their lives under the delusion that no Predator movie protagonist could ever possibly equal Arnold Schwarzenegger. The film itself adds to this delusion with the way it reverses Dutch and the Predator's positions throughout. Dutch begins as the technologically superior force, bringing overwhelming firepower to bear against unprepared opponents, in a parody of the fair fight that the U.S. military's preferred ever since it fought this continent's native population to near extinction. And by the end, the Predator is the one firing randomly into the jungle at an opponent it can't see, and whose motives it may comprehend in the abstract. Survival is a pretty easy one to get, as these things go, but abstract understanding will only carry you so far. "What the hell are you?" Dutch asks the Predator at the end, and it does the only thing it can do, and throws the question right back in his face. They're both the same, in ways that go light years beyond the usual "we're not so different, you and I" speech that antagonists like to give protagonists in action movies. They've both been sculpted by their separate societies into ruthless killing machines who seem to take active enjoyment in destroying other sentient life forms. Both are framed and filmed as masculine ideals, and both expose the weaknesses of those ideals just by existing. Brittle arrogance, leading to hubris, which attracts the attention of Nemesis, the last god in the world you want to fuck with. She'll kill your ass with dramatic irony. Dutch and the Predator become each other's nemesis, because American masculinity and American conservatism have always been their own worst enemies. But, then again, this could all be me projecting. We can learn some things about the Predator through context clues. Those teeth and those claws are obviously meant to hold wriggly things while you bite down on them, and the Predator seems real comfortable in trees. So what we have here are a species of arboreal reptiles, mammals, beings who can only see in infrared, but clearly know about other spectrums of light. After all, they have laser sights that we can see. They also have room enough in their big ol' heads for big ol' brains. And once you have that and opposable thumbs, then the rest is just tedious lab work, no matter how long it takes. Maybe they only have a few million years of evolution on us. Shit, maybe they only have a few thousand. Are there statues of Predator Zephram Cochrane outside of Predator Federation headquarters in Predator San Francisco? I don't know, and quite frankly, I don't want to know. I just want to hold that image in my head. Like this big statue of Predator Zephram Cochrane, and he's, holding a skull in one hand and a warp drive, or whatever they call it, in the other. And it's like, screaming at the sky, of course. Yeah. Most of what we know about the Predator comes from Dutch and Company's speculations, which we buy because movies have trained us to trust what protagonists say, and accept it as the gospel truth. But they could always be wrong. We could always be wrong. Are these the honorable scions of a noble warrior culture dedicated to proving itself against the most dangerous beings in the cosmos? Or are these just the Predator equivalent of dentists who go to Africa to shoot elephants? Are these just Predator Republicans? This individual certainly seems to be the type of guy who's into skulls, and we all know about those people, don't we? Personally, I always thought that their civilization kind of paralleled the Vulcans from Star Trek. They almost nuked themselves out of existence while we were still fucking around with the Bronze Age. And instead of preaching the gospel of logic, the suppression of emotions, Predator Surak started preaching the gospel of hunting. That is, shooting all of your, adolescent and young adults, let's be gendered and say male aggression, into space, where it can't, shoot up a Predator mall, or school, or take a chunk out of a Predator city with their wrist-mounted nuclear devices that they totally have, just wandering around with those casually. All we really know for sure is that the Predators are metaphors for the hypocrisies of sport hunting. He didn't kill you because you weren't armed. No sport. Well, what sport is there in picking off motherfuckers under your cloak of invisibility, A lesser movie might have left it at that, but this movie went far enough to make them a metaphor for U.S. intervention. Thus, what we now would call settler colonialism. The, for lack of a better word, primitive stage of settler colonialism. When you don't actually set any roots down, no, you gotta prepare the territory with hunting expeditions into hostile, uncivilized wilderness that of course has plenty of civilizations in it, but you don't care about that because shit, they don't speak your language or use your technology, so what are they? They might as well just be animals, right? Best to kill them for sport. And so this metaphor for the hypocrisies of sport hunting becomes a metaphor for the United States itself, and with a degree of subtle stealth that would do its own antagonist proud. And that's enough to make this movie as vibrant and alive as it was almost 40 years ago. And boss, that's tough enough. Certainly more than you could say for some action movies, and slasher movies, and sci-fi movies. More than you could say for some other Predator films. But we'll get there eventually, too. Thanks for watching, everyone. And if you really liked this review, consider supporting the show on Patreon, like the fine people whose names I'm about to read to you right now. Mr. Hootie Dean, Detective Steve, The After Movie Diner, and Stu G. Next time, my favorite Predator film.